if you can, to offer some comments on both of those presentations.
Thank you. I'm not going to speak for very long because I think probably most people in the room want to ask as many questions as they can to the two speakers that we've heard already. But I will start with a little personal anecdote about the all-pervasive role of Joe Hanlon in my development career. We hadn't actually met formally until today, but what got me into development in the first place was studying Southern African politics in Leeds University in the late 80s, early 90s, when Joe was writing prolifically about the war of destabilisation and the role of South Africa in trying to destroy Angola and Mozambique. Then got a job in an NGO, thought it might be a good idea to do the Development Management Masters at OU, and sure enough, there he is again, writing all the books. I then worked for DFID in Mozambique for 5 years, and nobody can work in Mozambique without tapping into Joe's extensive list of publications about that country. And here we are again, now working on social protection for DFID and Oppie Pups. I'm thinking that I might consult on what he's going to do next before I decide what I'm going to do. I wanted to make 3 reflections about the books, other than talking about Joe. I think a very, very practical one, which is about the importance of reaching out to new audiences. And I think that Just Give Money to the Poor is a really good example. Now, I'm not sure if this is a very strong indicator of anything, but there's been an acute imbalance between supply and demand in the corridors of Palace Street and DFID on trying to get hold of copies of Just Give Money for the Poor. Serious begging, borrowing and stealing going on. This could be some sort of proxy indicator of the fact that this is arrived at the right time and has tapped into some sort of deep vein of popular appeal, at least within our organisation. I think it's difficult to believe that a publication that was entitled Social Protection in the Global South would have that same sort of rock and roll quality. So I think there's some really important lessons here. I mean, this sounds slightly flippant, but we do need to break out from our usual circles, our usual language, our established peer groups, all using this sort of secret garden language that nobody else understands. And actually, for us in DFID, with a new set of ministers, this is a very important lesson to learn, to think about how often we use jargon and how we need to find different ways of talking to people who maybe come to an issue quite new. So, of course, the book is about a simple concept, just giving money to the poor, and it's got a compelling title. But there's more to it than this. And it's not just the title of the book and the contents of the book, but I've been really pleased as well to see some of the sort of marketing strategies that the team have used. I heard David on You and Yours on Radio 4, for example. Now, I'm not claiming that this is a broad audience, but it's certainly broader than an ODIO book launch, for example. There's Duncan Green's blog for Oxfam on his review of the book, which I think is a great summary if you don't have time to read the whole thing. And I'm pleased that David says that he's going to be doing the Development Drums blog with Owen Barder, if he hasn't done already.
I think it's up this week, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I think this is a very interesting lesson, and my colleagues who work in Research and Evidence Division in DFID, I think, are drawing some lessons from this. You know, we fund a lot of research work, but it's quite rare that work is publicised and marketed in this much more sort of broad-based way. An important lesson for us, I think. The second thing I want to just mention is about the important complementarity of these 2 books. And I think this works in 2 ways. On the cash transfers agenda and the broader agenda around how we extend social protection, what we've been learning in DFID is that this needs to be underpinned by a thorough and up-to-date understanding of what we mean by poverty, what we mean by the poorest, who are the chronic poor, who are the transient poor. So, you know, we'll move forward in social protection if we broaden this understanding. I think conversely, on the other side, when you're talking with public policymakers, either inside our organisation, with other donors, or with partner governments, the discussions about how you might be implementing your cash transfer programme do actually, sometimes for the first time, generate some debate about, well, who are the poor? What is our understanding of poor people's lives? And I think this is a really important aspect, because by working on cash transfers, we're starting to actually have some fundamental dialogue about people's preconceived ideas of poor people and what they do. And this question that both Joe and David have talked about trusting the poor. Incidentally, what this means internally in DFID for my team is that we're doing a sort of an internal program for DFID staff, which we're calling just Poverty Refresh, which is this sense of trying to remind the people in the organisation, go back to first principles about what do we understand about poor people's lives and the difference between poverty and vulnerability. Useful every so often to go back to those first principles, I think. The third thing I wanted to say is maybe specifically in response to some of what we heard today about the role of donors. And if you've seen the book, there's the jacket says that Just Give Money to the Poor directly challenges an aid industry that thrives on complexity and mystification. Well, as a representative of that industry, I feel I need to slightly nuance that argument a little bit, and the impression that you might have got that cash transfers is an aid-free zone. In fact, I'm going to quote Armando, particularly as he's not here, so he can't refute the quotation. In a recent meeting with us in DFID, I think he said something along the lines of, DFID's played a really important role in cash transfers and this agenda over the last few years, so don't screw it up. So there is this sense that maybe we do have an important role to play. I think that role boils down to three specific areas. Firstly, I think there's a role for donors like DFID and others to build and support an evidence base. Yes, maybe we've now got enough evidence that poor people can be trusted. I don't think that our evidence programme at the moment is questioning that. But there are still questions about how design of social protection, cash transfer programmes in different ways can have different types of impacts. And to be honest, DFID has been funding CPRC for a number of years, and I think it's been an important part and partner of this story. The second one is about our role in working with governments to deliver quality programmes on the ground. I was thinking in terms of back-of-the-envelope calculations, if there's approximately 45 countries delivering these programmes to, I can't remember the figure you said, Joe, 110 million?
10 million families.
Our back-of-the-envelope calculation in DFID is that we're through the programmes that we're supporting, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, we think that our programmes are reaching around 30 million people. So we're actually involved in quite a lot of the programmes in low-income countries that Joe is talking about. So that's the second one, the role of working at country level with governments to extend programmes. And I think it's recognised that while the running costs of these programmes are not necessarily unaffordable, there are quite a lot of upfront design costs. How you get a payment system that is protected and safe and make sure that money gets to the right people. How do you go out and make sure that you're targeting and enrolling the right people on the programme? And how do you do that dynamically? Because who's poor today is not the same as who might be poor tomorrow. So there are some important sort of design and systems building costs that donors can help with, and I think that's acknowledged in the books. I think the third role that we play in DFID is helping to shape the international debate and trying to see if we can make space in various international fora to make sure that issues around the poorest and issues around vulnerability and the role of social protection and cash transfers are getting coverage, whether that's through the G20 or in the upcoming MDG summit, or in terms of, for example, the World Bank's recently published Forward 5-year strategy. There has been a role to play there in trying to make sure that these issues stay high on the agenda. I mean, I think it's important to say that cash transfers and social protection more generally are not absolutely mainstream in the way that health and education are. And that's a context that we mustn't forget. In terms of the role that DFID plays, I just wanted to say a couple of things about the fact that we have a new government, as you all know. I think there are some indications that our new ministerial team in DFID are actually quite enthusiastic about the role of cash transfers and this concept of putting trust in the poor people themselves. Many of you will have heard the Secretary of State's speech, I think, back on the 3rd of June at Oxfam, just a week or so ago, in which he talked about giving control to citizens through direct cash transfers. And if you've read the One World Conservatives, the Conservatism Green paper, the manifesto before the election, you'll see that there's quite a lot of reference in there to expanding and exploring cash transfers. So to sum up then, just 3 points I wanted to make about the books. Some really important lessons about communicating differently and reaching out and thinking about how we can keep a broader UK taxpayer engagement in international development as we move into a more difficult time here in the UK. Secondly, the essential complementarity of thinking about and understanding what we mean by poverty and the poorest with what we're doing on cash transfers and social protection, and why the two books need to go together. And thirdly, a special plea that we do, I think, in DFID and other donors have a role, albeit complementary, in supporting the scaling up of cash transfers. Thank you.